Welcome back to today's video. Quite a big update coming up today because it looks like we've got some hot weather on the way for next week. It's not a done deal though, we've had a run from the GM, the Canadian model, which sort of throws a bit of a spanner in the works actually, so it's still kind of a week away, although the pattern that brings this push of hot weather starts getting into place on Monday and Tuesday, so the pattern that's going to deliver the hot weather sort of is under a week away, but the actual heat is still around a week away, the core of it, and that's a little time off really, so we've got to wait and see a bit longer for you to be confident, but I'll show you the charts on it anyway. Some really quite extreme charts actually showing up. This could be a big push in temperatures, especially compared with what we've had so far this summer. But before I get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on all the pages at gasfizz.com. Have a browse through widgets. Any articles that you're interested in, please click through. You have to go off and read the article. Thanks very much for doing that. There's video ads on most of the pages. They will open out within the content. When you've watched the video, they'll close back up again. Thanks very much. Getting you guys all paying for the website. So thanks for doing that. Going to very quickly start off with the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles for the next couple of weeks. The red line here is the 30-year temperature average, of course. As you know, use these a lot in the videos. And we're a bit above average up the moment in a relatively warm and humid air mass, so there's a lot of cloud associated with that, so it won't necessarily realise the potential actually, but we'll be cooling off anyway. I was going to the weekend temporarily, but then we get this big push up in the temperatures taking place as we go through into next week. We're going significantly above the red line. There you can see that the white line, which is the ensemble mean. I talk about all of this in the ensemble tutorial, by the way, so check that out. But the white line is the ensemble mean, which means we take every single member of the ensemble, all the individual coloured lines, look a bit like spaghetti if you like. We take them and put them together and create a mean line, which is this white line. You see that is going significantly above the 30-year temperature average, and some of these ensemble members go very, very hot indeed, go to 20 Celsius at 850 HPA in the upper atmosphere. That is really hot temperatures, would lift the temperatures up into the 90s Fahrenheit if it did come off. In terms of the precipitation spikes, we can see that it's a relatively dry period coming up, although we get some quite big spikes somewhere around the 4th, 5th of July, this zone just here, perhaps indicating the chance of a thundery breakdown, and at that point you see the temperatures are actually beginning to drop down a little bit, albeit with a lot of scatter, but generally a bit of a cooling trend then takes place through to the end of the first week of July into the start of the second week of July, and that could be associated with a thundery breakdown perhaps, and then a cooler push of temperatures from off the Atlantic. But the temperature anomaly for the coming week has gone warmer than average, so from the 25th of June through to Friday the 3rd of July, we're above average, around 2 to 4 degrees above in terms of that anomaly. It's been very cool, of course, over the past couple of months. We've been generally in most blue colours, but you can see that for the coming week, the idea is to shift those cool temperature anomalies down into South East Europe and turn it generally quite warm. Very hot over Spain. There we've got temperature anomalies going around 6 to 8 degrees above average, and of course it's very hot anyway at this time of year in Spain, of course, so to be sort of 6 to 8 degrees above the early July average in Spain is going to be really, really hot indeed. Sort of a deadly heat wave could be on the way in some parts of Spain, and that could push up in some parts of France as well through the course of next week. The precipitation anomalies are going to be, well, a bit drier than average in the south, and still a little bit wetter than average in the far north, or near normal in the far north in terms of precipitation anomalies. But for much of Western Europe, actually, the precipitation anomalies are going drier than average. So let's have a look at the chart, see how they all develop this heat wave. We can see that for the GFS chart for Monday, we're not seeing anything particularly out of the ordinary at that point. We've got a ridge of high pressure extending in from the Azores high. It's always the Azores high that triggers these hot spells in the summer, and that's ridging in through the course of Monday. So as I say, the pattern that delivers this hot spell is getting into place in Monday and Tuesday, or on Monday and Tuesday, although the heat doesn't really arrive until the second half of next week, which is still just about in the unreliable time frame. So by the time we get through to Tuesday, 30th of June, that high pressure is building nicely across the country at 1,025 millibars, and then it just really takes over pattern through to the middle of next week. It ridges up to Scandinavia, and that starts to pull the winds and the flow up from the south and the southeast Europe, dragging up the heat that's already pushing out of Spain and into France, dragging that northwards across many central and northern and western parts of Europe. And that high pressure then persists through into the second half of next week. This is Thursday, the 2nd of July. High pressure over Scandinavia, bringing up these hot southerly to southeast winds. It will be hot air. If the pattern plays out like this will be hot air coming up, because the heat is already in place, if you like, to tap into across France. So if we get the winds into the southeast like this is showing, it will pull up hot air from off the continent. Eventually we have to start thinking about a breakdown, so as we go through to Friday the 3rd of July, hinting at low pressure developing within the heat and humidity out west of the country. That could be bringing thunderstorms into west and the southwest. And then they probably get more widespread those storms as we go through the first weekend of July. The weekend of the 4th and the 5th of July probably sees these storms pushing northwards and eastwards across the country. But that's like 2, 3, 4 days of proper hot temperatures before those storms break out. The upper air temperatures show this up very nicely. We start off next week quite cool there with those yellow colours across the country. That's within relatively cool air. And then as we move through the week, we see the heat building across Spain. There we are with the 25 Celsius isotherm across many parts of Spain. That is incredibly hot air pushing up into Spain, and that heat explodes northwards or plumes northwards as we go through the week. So the 20 Celsius isotherm is pushing across France, will be lifting temperature to around 100 Fahrenheit for central and southern parts of France. And then as we go through the week, the heat just pushes northwards. So by the time we get through to the end of the week, yeah, we're within a heat wave there across the UK. We've got the 20 Celsius isotherm pushing up into England and Wales in particular. Now, 20 Celsius isotherm is one of the things that we look at, one of the guides that we look at to get temperatures up to 100 Fahrenheit. Because it's been relatively cool so far this summer, I think we will struggle to get the temperatures that high. If this was coming off, say, a month of really quite hot weather and dry weather, we would perhaps be able to think about 100 Fahrenheit with the 20 Celsius isotherm pushing up from France. But because we're still relatively early in the summer, and because we haven't had much hot weather, the ground is still going to be relatively cool, as will the channel and the seas around the country. So it will limit what the 20 Celsius isotherm could do. Nevertheless, that would be enough to push temperatures above 90 Fahrenheit quite widely, I would suspect, across much of the country if it came off. And of course, many parts of France will be above 100 Fahrenheit with that. As we go through to next weekend, the weekend of the 4th, 5th of July, the heat clings on, although remember, we're developing low pressure around the country by this point, so I think by that weekend we will be seeing increasing risk of thunderstorms, perhaps torrential thunderstorms breaking out within that heat and humidity, and eventually the cooler air is trying to come in off the Atlantic. These are the surface temperatures. We start next week relatively cool, just 19, 20 degrees, nothing out of the ordinary really, but you can see the heat lurking down across Spain, central parts of Spain up to 40 Fahrenheit, that's over up to 40 Celsius, that's over 100 Fahrenheit, around 104 Fahrenheit for central parts of Spain, I think, by the start of next week. As we run through the week, we're going to see the temperatures gradually increasing from the south. So by the time we get through to Tuesday, the last day of June, we're already sort of up to 24, 25, 26 degrees around the upper 70s Fahrenheit, so it's very warm even at the start of next week. And then the heat just builds up through the course of the week. On the 1st of July, Wednesday the 1st, we're widely into the mid-20s, probably increase out a little bit towards 27, 28. And then the second half of next week is when that heat rebuilds. Look how hot it is across much of France, temperatures around 100 Fahrenheit there. For us, we're going up to around 30 degrees, that's 86 Fahrenheit on Thursday the 2nd of July. We go through to Friday the 3rd of July, and the temperatures are pushing up further. So this is indicating around 31, that's 88 Fahrenheit, but I reckon you will be able to increase out above 90 Fahrenheit. You get to around 32, 33, possibly 34 degrees. Getting very, very hot, dangerously hot really, across much of France. And then that heat just continues through into the weekend. But by then we do have the increasing risk of thunderstorms breaking out. The ECMWF is in agreement with the GFS on this, and so that adds to confidence. Here we are for Monday. We've got that ridge of high pressure building from the Azores, starting it all off. The high pressure builds through the country on Tuesday. Then we start to drag up those hot southerly winds on Wednesday. The 1st of July will be a hot start to the month, if this is right. Inevitably, within that heat, we start to generate a heat low. Probably won't do too much through the working week next week, but I think that will be the way we go into the weekend. Increased thunderstorms. Again, these are the upper air temperatures for Thursday, the 2nd of July. 20 Celsius isotherm is in across England. It's very unusual to get the 20 Celsius isotherm this far north, by the way. You only normally get this in the very hottest summers, like August 2003 had this. And it had been a hot summer anyway, so the continent was in a hot sort of condition to allow the 20 Celsius isotherm to come this far north. But to do this relatively early in the summer and after quite a cool summer really so far, very, very unusual what's going on next week, and perhaps that just gives a little bit of doubt about whether things will end up this hot, because that is quite extreme considering you haven't had an extreme weather pattern so far this summer. And then as we go through into the end of next week, inevitably, the low pressure starts to develop within that really hot air across the country. So as we move through the weekend before 5th of July, gradually low pressure takes over, probably bringing some violent thunderstorms, and then start to cool things down. There's the upper air temperatures by certainly the 5th of July, and the heat is being moved in central parts of Europe as this cooler air comes in off the Atlantic. But just to put the caveat in that the GEM isn't in agreement with this, so I want to leave you with this one. Here we are for Monday. Again, same idea. The high pressure is ridging in from the Azores and it builds through the country early next week. But it sort of goes into different positions. So the high pressure actually ridges northwards. We've got quite a bit of northern blocking here across Greenland, and what happens is that instead of the high pressure going to Scandinavia and pulling the winds up from the southeast, the GEM wants to take the high pressure to the north, or centric to the north, which means that the flow is coming around the high pressure from sort of an northeasterly type direction. And as we go through the second half of next week, we see that we keep the winds generally from more of an easterly to northeasterly type direction. This would drastically limit the temperature, heat potential. It would still be very warm and very pleasant, but it would be nowhere near as hot as the GFS and the ECMWF are going for, and eventually does actually finish up quite unsettled with G. You can see that by the time we get through to day 10, which is certainly the 5th of July, still got quite a bit of northern block, and we bring this low pressure in. That's the low pressure that the GFS of the ECM wants to trigger the thunderstorms, the thundery breakdown, but this will probably be bringing, well, some pretty heavy rain off the Atlantic, and the air will probably be quite cool as well. If we have a look at the upper air temperatures, you can see what they're showing. You can see there's nothing very exciting about that at all. In fact, it's probably a bit below average. Now, the GEM is always different to the other two. I've explained this before. It's not as good as the other two, but it's just there really this morning to keep our feet on the ground with this. It's probably going to move towards what the GFS and the ECM are showing, but it just goes to show that when you're talking about weather sort of a week away, over a week away, it can't be relied upon, and just keep your feet on the ground a little bit and keep that in mind, that the GEM is not anywhere near as hot or as bullish about this potential heat wave next week. Nevertheless, with the GFS and the ECM both going for it big time, I'm going to take it seriously, and we could be in for our first big push of heat next week. Certainly temperatures going up to 30 degrees if these charts come off. The GFS and the ECM, if they come off, won't if the GEM comes off. probably going above 32 or more. That's 90 Fahrenheit, so it could be really very, very hot in the second half of next week, and maybe with an increased risk of thunderstorms as well. So we're all getting very, very interesting after quite a cool start to the summer. Looks like we're going to try and get a burst of heat, and we're going to have to wait and see how it plays out. Tomorrow we're doing a JMA Friday, which will have a look at the weather for the coming month. No doubt, though, if the charts are still looking hot, we'll have a look at some of those charts as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.